The dust in Willow Creek didn't just settle on your skin, it got inside you. In the summer of 1882, that dust was a constant reminder of everything dry and broken in Sarah Mackenzie's life. It had been 3 years since the fever took her husband, Thomas, leaving her with a mortgaged plot of land and a heart full of ghosts. She spent her days in Garrison's general store, mending clothes for pennies. Her fingers, once soft from a life back east, were now a roadmap of calluses and pinpricks. But she never complained. A widow's work was hard to come by, and Mr. Garrison, at least, paid his wages. She was hunched over a rancher's vest, fighting a tear that seemed to have a life of its own, when the bell over the store's door chimed. It was Cornelius Blackwood. His expensive boots clicked on the floorboards like a ticking clock. He was the richest man in 3 counties, the owner of a sprawling cattle empire, and the holder of the mortgage on what was left of Thomas's dream. "Afternoon, Mrs. Mackenzie," he said. His voice was smooth as whiskey, but his smile never touched his cold, calculating eyes. Those eyes lingered on the curve of her neck, on the wisps of auburn hair that had escaped her bonnet. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She went back to her sewing, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. "Working hard as always, I see," he purred, moving closer. The smell of his fancy cologne was a foul mix with the store's musty air. "Such dedication. You know, I could use a woman with your skills up at the ranch. The pay would be considerably better." Sarah's needle stopped mid-stitch. The offer hung in the air, thick and ugly. Everyone in Willow Creek knew what kind of skills Blackwood's housekeepers were expected to have. "Thank you, but I'm content here." "Content?" He let out a laugh that sounded like rocks grinding together. "Here? In this dusty shop? Barely earning enough to eat? You deserve better, Mrs. Mackenzie." He didn't have to say the rest. Her pride, though tattered and worn, was all she had left. "I said, I'm content, Mr. Blackwood." His face went dark. A storm was about to break. But just then, Mr. Garrison came out from the back room, and the tension fizzled into fake smiles and talk of cattle prices. When Blackwood finally left, Sarah let out a breath she didn't even know she was holding. She thought that was the end of it. She was wrong. 2 nights later, the real trouble started. Sarah was walking home late, the streets of Willow Creek empty and silent except for the tinny sound of a piano drifting from the saloon. She pulled her shawl tight, her footsteps echoing in the dark. As she passed the alley next to the hotel, a hand shot out of the shadows. It grabbed her, yanking her off her feet. Another hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her scream. She smelled whiskey, sweat, and that same expensive cologne. It was Blackwood. Now, Mrs. Mackenzie," he slurred, his voice thick with liquor. "No need to be dramatic. I made you a generous offer. It's time you showed a little gratitude." She fought. She fought with the fury of a cornered animal. She kicked and scratched and bit, but he was too strong. Her dress tore at the shoulder. Her bonnet was knocked to the muddy ground. His grip was like iron, crushing the air from her lungs. With a final surge of desperation, she raked her nails across his face. He roared in pain and anger, and then he hit her. Hard. The blow sent her sprawling into the dirt, her head ringing. And that's when the saloon's back door creaked open. A young cowhand named Jake Morrison stumbled out, blinking in the moonlight. He saw Sarah on the ground, her dress torn. He saw Blackwood looming over her, a trickle of blood running down his cheek. Blackwood's voice, suddenly sober and cold as ice, cut through the night. "This woman, she propositioned me, tried to sell herself. When I refused, she attacked me like a wildcat. Look at my face." Sarah scrambled to her feet, the world spinning. "No, that's a lie. He grabbed me." "Save your breath," Blackwood snarled. He turned to the cowhand. "Morrison, you're my witness. You saw it all. This woman assaulted me after I declined her shameful offer." Sarah's blood ran cold. She looked at Jake Morrison, a boy she'd known for 2 years, a boy whose shirt she'd mended. She saw the fear in his eyes, the fear of crossing the most powerful man in the territory. She saw him weigh his options, his life or her honor. He slowly, deliberately nodded his head, and in that moment, Something inside Sarah Mackenzie shattered into a million pieces. By morning, the lie had spread through Willow Creek like a plague. Blackwood's version, of course. The desperate widow, Sarah Mackenzie, had thrown herself at him in an alley. When the righteous Mr. Blackwood refused her, she'd flown into a rage. The scratches on his face were all the proof they needed. Sarah woke up to find the word harlot painted in crude red letters across her front door. She tried to scrub it off, but the stain seemed to sink into the wood. It was a brand. At the general store, Mr. Garrison wouldn't even look her in the eye. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he mumbled, staring at his boots. "I can't have you working here anymore. It's bad for business. You understand." She understood. She understood when Mrs. Palmer, a woman whose children's clothes she had patched a dozen times, crossed the street to avoid her. She understood when the pastor's wife told her she was no longer welcome at Sunday service. She understood when children, who used to smile at her, now threw stones and chanted names they'd heard their parents whisper. The town had made its judgment. The final blow came 3 days later. Blackwood himself arrived at her little house, the sheriff standing behind him like a paid dog. He waved the mortgage papers in her face. "3 days," Blackwood said, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. The scratches from her nails were healing, but the memory of them was a fresh wound. "You have 3 days to pay the loan in full. If you can't, I'll have you removed. Though I can't imagine any respectable man would extend credit to a woman of your character." He wanted her gone, not just shamed, gone. That night, Sarah sat alone in her dark kitchen. Outside, she could hear the whispers. Jezebel, harlot, shame of the town. She pressed her hands to her ears, but the words were already inside her, echoing in the empty spaces of her heart. The next morning, she found her small vegetable garden trampled into the dirt. Her chicken coop was smashed to pieces, the birds scattered or dead. A small crowd gathered to watch her kneel in the ruins of her life. No one offered to help. "Should have known what she was the day she arrived," she heard Martha Collins say. "These Eastern women, bringing their city ways." "Poor Thomas," another woman added, "must be spinning in his grave." On the second night, they set fire to her shed. She managed to beat the flames out with a blanket, but not before all her stored food and Thomas's old tools were turned to ash and smoke. She ran to the sheriff, her face smeared with soot, her hands burned. He didn't even look up from his desk. "Can't arrest the whole town, Mrs. Mackenzie," he said with a sigh. "Maybe you should just consider moving on, for everyone's sake." The third day dawned, hot and merciless. There was nothing left to do. She packed what little she could carry, a change of clothes, her mother's Bible, the last photograph of Thomas, and the few coins she'd hidden under a floorboard. Everything else was lost. The life she and Thomas had dreamed of building was gone, swallowed by a lie. When she stepped out of her house for the last time, the crowd was waiting. They lined the street like it was a twisted parade. Their faces were a grotesque mural of contempt and sick satisfaction. Someone threw a rotten tomato. It splattered across her small travel case, the red juice looking like blood. Then came the stones, the mud, the insults. "Get out! Don't you ever come back!" Sarah walked through the gauntlet, her head held high. Tears streamed down her face, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Each step was an act of defiance. Each stone that hit her was a reminder of what she was leaving behind. At the edge of town, where the dusty street met the endless, shimmering desert, she allowed herself one last look back. Blackwood was standing on the hotel porch watching her. He saw her turn, and a slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. He touched the brim of his hat in a final mocking salute. She turned away, her jaw set. She kept walking, heading straight into the vast, empty wasteland. She carried nothing but her meager bag and a heart so thoroughly broken she wondered if it would ever beat properly again. Behind her, Willow Creek celebrated its victory over sin. They never once questioned the word of their richest citizen. The sun climbed higher, and Sarah Mackenzie, branded by a lie she couldn't outrun, disappeared into the heat. The desert was a different kind of monster. It didn't scream insults or throw stones. It was silent, patient. It would kill you slowly without malice, simply because you didn't belong. For 3 days Sarah walked. The sun was a hammer beating down on her head. The mountains she'd seen from town seemed to mock her, never getting any closer. Her town boots, not made for this kind of punishment, were falling apart. Her feet were a mess of blisters and raw skin. Her water was almost gone. The canvas bag she'd filled at the last creek was now limp and warm. Each sip was a calculated risk. Too much now meant none later. This land was nothing like the green hills of Pennsylvania where she'd grown up. Here, life clung to existence by a thread. Lizards skittered across her path. A rattlesnake sunning on a rock sent her stumbling back, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The desert was full of 1,000 ways to die. By the 4th day, her mind started to play tricks on her. She heard Thomas calling her name on the wind. She'd turn expecting to see him, but there was only the shimmering heat and the lonely dance of a tumbleweed. "I'm sorry," she whispered to his ghost, her throat as dry as the sand beneath her feet. "I couldn't hold on to our dream." Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her tongue felt swollen in her mouth. She collapsed in the shade of a large boulder, her body screaming for rest. She allowed herself 2 precious sips of the warm, gritty water. She pulled out the photograph of Thomas. It was creased and stained with tears she could no longer afford to cry. "What would you think of me now?" she asked the fading image. "Your wife, branded a harlot, wandering the desert like a ghost." A bitter, croaking laugh escaped her. She thought of Willow Creek. She imagined them in their homes, at their dinner tables, not giving a single thought to the woman they had cast out. It had been so easy for them. So easy to believe the worst of a lone widow. So much easier to condemn the accused than to question the accuser. As the sun began to dip, she forced herself to her feet. The mountains were a faint, hazy promise on the horizon. Where there were mountains, there might be water. It was a slim hope, but it was all she had. Darkness fell, and the coyotes began their mournful song. She huddled in a cluster of rocks, too exhausted for a fire, too tired to fear the scorpions and snakes that owned the night. The stars came out, a brilliant cold canopy of light. "At least," she murmured to herself, "they can't take this from me." Sleep came in fits and starts. She dreamed of cool, clear water that vanished the moment she tried to drink. She dreamed of Blackwood's cologne, a suffocating sweet smell that made her wake up gasping for air. The 5th day brought the vultures. They circled high above, black specks against the merciless blue sky. They were patient. They knew she was failing. "Not yet," she rasped at them, her voice a raw whisper. "Not today." But her body was betraying her will. Her steps grew shorter. She stumbled more often. The mountains seemed to be moving away from her, a cruel mirage. The last of her water was gone. The canvas bag hung empty at her side, a useless weight. She thought of her mother, of the gentle hands that had taught her to sew and bake. She thought of the girls she'd grown up with, now living safe, respectable lives. The sun was low in the sky when her legs finally gave out. She fell hard, the sharp rocks tearing at the skin on her palms. She lay there, her cheek pressed against the warm earth, and for a long moment she considered just staying. It would be so easy. Just close her eyes and let the desert take her. Let the vultures have their prize. She would be another cautionary tale, the fallen woman who got what she deserved. But then something flickered to life deep inside her, a tiny ember of rage. Rage at Blackwood for his lie, rage at the town for their cruelty, rage at the sheer, brutal unfairness of it all. She hadn't asked for any of this. She had lived quietly. She had worked honestly. And for that, she was left here to die like an animal. With an effort that felt superhuman, she pushed herself up, first to her hands and knees, then swaying to her feet. The horizon tilted and swam, but she fixed her eyes on those distant purple mountains and took a step, then another. "My name," she said, the words scraping her throat, "is Sarah Mackenzie. I am not what they called me." The words became a rhythm, a prayer, a declaration of war against the dying of the light. I am not. I am not. I am not. The sun was kissing the horizon, painting the desert in fiery shades of gold and crimson, when she saw them. At first she thought it was another hallucination. dark shapes moving against the twilight. But then she heard it, the faint rhythmic sound of hoofbeats. It was real. She tried to call out, but no sound came. She raised a trembling hand, a tiny beacon in the vast emptiness. The riders drew closer, and her heart, which had been filled with a desperate, foolish hope, sank into the pit of her stomach. These were not cowboys. They were not soldiers. They were Apache warriors. Their faces were painted for war. The dying light glinted off the barrels of rifles and the tips of spears. She'd heard the stories in Willow Creek, the lurid newspaper accounts of raids and massacres, of settlers found mutilated, of Apache brutality. Standing there, too weak to run, too tired to even feel the proper kind of fear, Sarah almost laughed. Out of the frying pan and into the fire. At least this would be quick. The warriors circled her, their ponies kicking up dust. They called to each other in a harsh alien tongue, their eyes studying her tattered dress, her blistered feet, her empty water bag. One of them dismounted. He was young, maybe 20, with sharp, intelligent eyes. He approached her cautiously, as if she might be a trap. He said something to the others. An older warrior, his face a roadmap of scars, barked an order. The young warrior unslung a water skin from his horse. He walked up to her and held it out. Sarah just stared at it. She didn't understand. Weren't they going to kill her? Wasn't that how these stories always ended? The warrior shook the water skin impatiently, then pressed it into her hands. The first taste of cool water was so exquisite it almost brought her to her knees. She drank greedily, not stopping until the young man gently pulled the skin away, murmuring something that sounded like a warning. More words were exchanged. A debate. They gestured at her, then back in the direction of Willow Creek. Finally, the scarred warrior gave a sharp nod. The young one pulled Sarah up onto his horse, settling her in front of him. She had no strength left to resist. She had nothing left at all. As they rode off into the deepening darkness, Sarah's last coherent thought was a strange one. The civilized people of Willow Creek had branded her a whore and driven her out to die. And the savages they feared so much had just given her water. The irony was there, sharp and clear, but she was too exhausted to grasp it. The rhythm of the horse and the sheer weight of her depletion pulled her down into unconsciousness. She slumped against the warrior's back, unaware that her journey through the desert was over, and a much stranger, more dangerous journey was just about to begin. She woke up in a different world. The sounds were wrong, guttural voices, the barking of dogs, the crackle of a dozen fires. The air smelled of wood smoke and sage and roasting meat. Sarah opened her eyes to the dim filtered light of a wickiup, a dome-shaped hut made of branches and animal hides. She was lying on a bed of soft furs, a woven blanket covering her. Memory came rushing back. The desert, the thirst, the warriors. She sat up too quickly, her head spinning. An old woman entered, moving with a quiet grace that defied her age. She carried a wooden bowl of something that looked like corn mush. She said a few words in Apache, her tone wary but not unkind, and pressed the bowl into Sarah's hands. Sarah was too hungry to question it. She ate every last bite while the old woman watched her, her dark, knowing eyes missing nothing. When she was finished, the woman took the bowl and left. Sarah, on shaky legs, followed her out of the wickiup. She was in the middle of a bustling Apache camp. Dozens of wickiups were arranged in a rough circle. Women were grinding corn on the stone matats. Children were chasing dogs. Men were tending to horses and weapons. And every single one of them stopped to stare at her. The white woman. The looks ranged from open curiosity to raw, undisguised hatred. Several women spat on the ground as she passed. The men watched her with cold, unreadable expressions. Her pale skin and tattered town dress marked her as an outsider, an enemy. A commotion at the center of the camp drew everyone's attention. The crowd parted, and Sarah saw him for the first time. He was tall for an Apache, with broad shoulders and the lean, powerful build of a predator. Scars crisscrossed his chest and arms, telling stories of battles she couldn't imagine. His black hair was held back by a leather band, and his eyes. His eyes were like chips of black obsidian, hard and sharp enough to cut you. He spoke, and though she didn't understand the words, the authority in his voice was absolute. This was their leader, their chief. The crowd went silent as he walked toward her. He moved like a mountain cat, with a controlled power that was both beautiful and terrifying. He circled her slowly, his gaze taking in her ruined dress, her sunburnt face, her soft hands that had never known real work. Sarah forced herself to stand straight, to meet his stare. If this was where she was going to die, she would do it on her feet. He stopped in front of her. Then he reached out and grasped her chin, his touch firm but not cruel. He tilted her head, examining the bruise Blackwood had left on her cheek, the defiance she couldn't quite hide in her eyes. Then he spoke, in English, accented but perfectly clear. "You're my woman now." The words hit her like a physical blow. She tried to pull back, but his grip was like stone. "What? No, I'm not anyone's." He released her and turned away, barking orders in Apache. Just like that, it was done. The crowd dispersed, though they kept shooting glances at her, whispering behind their hands. She had been claimed, like a stray horse or a piece of property salvaged from the desert. The old woman reappeared and tugged at her sleeve, leading her to another wickiup. Inside, several other women were waiting. Before Sarah could protest, they stripped her of her ruined dress and gave her a new one. A two-piece outfit made of soft, supple deerskin, decorated with intricate beadwork. When she emerged, dressed as one of them but feeling more alien than ever, the chief was waiting. "I am Nietzsche," he said, his obsidian eyes sweeping over her. "You belong to me. You will work. You will learn our ways. You will not try to leave." "I don't belong to anyone," Sarah said, her voice shaking but firm. "I'm not an object to be claimed." A flicker of something, amusement maybe, crossed his face. "The desert would have claimed you? Now I have. Which is better?" He walked away without waiting for an answer. The women put her to work immediately, grinding corn until her arms felt like they would fall off, hauling heavy clay jars of water from a nearby stream, gathering firewood under the hot sun. The work was harder than anything she had ever done, and the other women seemed to take a cruel pleasure in her suffering. One woman in particular, a young, beautiful warrior with intricate tattoos on her chin, seemed to despise her most of all. Her name was Lausanne, and she would shove past Sarah, muttering insults that needed no translation. Sarah's soft hands blistered, then bled. Her back ached constantly. This wasn't salvation. It was just a different kind of hell. One afternoon, she stumbled while carrying a full water jar. It crashed to the ground, shattering into a dozen pieces. The precious water soaked into the dust. Several women laughed. Lausanne stepped forward, her face a mask of fury. She unleashed a torrent of angry Apache, gesturing at the broken jar, then at Sarah. The meaning was clear: useless, worthless, burden. Just then, Nietzsche appeared. He said nothing. He just looked at the broken pottery, at the wasted water, and then at Sarah's bleeding hands. He spoke a single sharp word to Lausanne. She fell silent, her eyes still burning with hate. Then, to Sarah's utter astonishment, Nietzsche knelt down and began picking up the larger pieces of the broken jar. "Tomorrow," he said to Sarah, not looking at her, "you learn to make a new one. Today, you rest." He stood up and walked away. That small, unexpected act of kindness was her undoing. The tears she had been fighting all day finally came, hot and silent. She turned away so no one would see, but she knew they were all watching. That night she lay in the wickiup that had been assigned to her. It was not Nietzsche's, she noted with a small spark of relief. She listened to the strange, foreign sounds of the camp settling down for the night. She thought of his words, "You're my woman now." Back in Willow Creek, they had called her a harlot, a woman who belonged to any man for the right price. Here she belonged to one man, taken as his property. Was this her fate? To be forever defined not by who she was, but by what men decided she was. She was a prisoner here, as surely as if she were in chains. The desert that had almost killed her was now her jailer. There was nowhere to run. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. She'd fled a false accusation of being a kept woman, only to become one in truth. But as she drifted off to sleep, one thought kept circling in her mind. Nietzsche had given her water. He had defended her from Lausanne. He had picked up the pieces of the jar she'd broken. They were small things, but they were more kindness than anyone in Willow Creek had shown her. Maybe, just maybe, in this strange new prison, she might find something she'd lost in that civilized town. Not freedom, but a different kind of strength. The days that followed were a blur of pain and exhaustion. Her life was reduced to a simple, brutal rhythm: work, eat, sleep, repeat. The Apache women treated her like a pack animal. They called her Inda, a word that meant white person, but they spat it like a curse. Enemy, outsider. It was a brand just like the one painted on her door in Willow Creek. Her mornings began before the sun was up. The old woman Nana would shake her awake and set her to building the fires. If she did it wrong, Lozen would kick it apart and make her start over, her voice dripping with contempt. The worst part was grinding the corn. Hour after endless hour, kneeling on the hard-packed earth, pushing a heavy stone until her shoulders screamed and her back felt like it was going to snap in two. The other women, their bodies hardened by a lifetime of this work, could grind a mountain of corn in the time it took Sarah to produce a small bowl of coarse meal. Weak, Lozen would say, grabbing Sarah's arm and squeezing the soft flesh. No good. What could she say? That she was raised to do embroidery, not manual labor? That her hands were made for a needle, not a grinding stone? She said nothing. She just kept grinding. The children were the cruelest. They would follow her, mocking her clumsy attempts at tasks they had mastered as toddlers. They pointed and laughed when she tried to scrape a hide and tore a hole in the precious leather. Through it all, Nietzsche watched. She would catch him looking at her from across the camp. He never interfered, not again. He just watched, his face a stony, unreadable mask. But he saw everything. He saw her struggle with the water jars. He saw Lausanne berate her. He saw her choke down the unfamiliar food, her body exhausted and aching. One afternoon, as she fumbled with basket reeds, her fingers bleeding and stiff, he appeared silently beside her. He took the reeds from her hands and, without a word, showed her the proper way to weave them. His own hands moved with a sure, practiced grace. He handed the materials back to her. She tried again, and this time, the pattern held, for a moment. Again, was all he said, before turning and walking away. That night she dreamed she was back in Willow Creek, being driven through the streets. But this time, the faces in the mob were the Apache women, and Lozen was leading them, a rock in her hand. She woke up gasping, her heart pounding. This was her life now, a different kind of nightmare. But as the weeks turned into a month, something began to change. Not them. Her. Her body started to harden. Calluses formed over the blisters on her hands. The muscles in her back and arms grew stronger. She learned to balance the water jars. She learned to grind the corn without wasting a single kernel. She learned to be silent, to watch, to listen. Her Apache vocabulary grew, one word at a time. But she was still an outsider, tolerated but not accepted, protected by Nietzsche's claim but not respected. The breaking point came during a tribal ceremony. There was dancing and feasting, a celebration of a successful hunt. Sarah had worked all day helping to prepare the food, but when the festivities began, she was left on the sidelines, an invisible ghost in the midst of their joy. That's when Lausanne made her move. She approached Sarah, holding a gourd filled with tesguino, a strong corn beer. She spoke loudly in Apache, her words sharp and mocking, gesturing for Sarah to drink. The crowd turned to watch, their faces eager for a spectacle. Sarah understood enough now to get the gist. Lausanne was calling her weak, useless, a parasite living off the tribe, not even worthy of being the chief's slave. The crowd murmured their agreement. It was Willow Creek all over again. A cold defiance rose in Sarah's chest. She took the gourd and drank, the bitter liquid burning its way down her throat. Lausanne laughed and pushed another one at her, and another. Sarah kept drinking, her head starting to spin. She would not show weakness, not in front of them. Finally, her legs gave out and she collapsed to her knees. Lausanne stood over her, triumphant, speaking to the crowd, gesturing dismissively at the fallen white woman. Inda, she repeated over and over. Inda. Through her blurred vision, Sarah saw Nietzsche approaching. The crowd parted for him like the sea. He looked down at Sarah, crumpled in the dust. Then he looked at Lozen. His face was like carved granite. He spoke, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of thunder. Lozen tried to argue, but he cut her off with a single sharp word. Then he reached down and pulled Sarah to her feet. He steadied her as she swayed, and then, to the absolute shock of the entire camp, he led her away from the fire. He led her to his own wickiup. Inside, he gently sat her down on his sleeping furs and brought her a gourd of water. Her hands were shaking too much to hold it, so he held it to her lips himself, waiting patiently as she sipped. "Why?" she finally managed to ask. The word was a raw, desperate croak. Why save her? Why claim her? Why do this now? He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his English was slow and careful. "My wife, she died 3 winters ago. A sickness. It took our son too." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "In the desert. I saw you. You chose to keep walking, when it would have been easier to lie down and die. That is strength." Sarah let out a bitter, broken laugh. "Strength? I can't even carry water." "That is a skill," he corrected her. "Skills can be learned, but the spirit that says, 'I will take one more step,' when there is no reason to, that cannot be taught. You have that." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than hardness in his eyes. "You have lost much. I see it, but you have not lost that." His words, this unexpected moment of understanding, broke through the dam she had built inside herself. The tears came, a hot, silent flood. Tears for Thomas, tears for her ruined name, tears for the home she had lost, and for this strange, brutal world she had been thrown into. Nietzsche simply sat with her in the quiet of his home, waiting for the storm to pass. "Tomorrow," he said, when she was finally quiet, "you will work with Nana. Only Nana. She will teach you, without mockery." He searched for the right word. "In time you will show them who you are." "And who am I?" she whispered, genuinely lost. "I don't even know anymore." "You are the woman who walked out of the desert," he said simply. "For now, that is enough." He left her then, to sleep in the safety of his wickiup. He, the chief, would sleep in the common shelter meant for single warriors. It was a gesture that would send shockwaves through the camp. As Sarah drifted into an exhausted sleep, she held on to his words. The woman who walked out of the desert. In Willow Creek, she had been defined by a lie. Here at least she was being defined by something she had actually done. She had survived. Tomorrow would be hard, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel hopeless. The drought was a slow, creeping death. The streams shrank to muddy trickles, then to sun-baked cracks in the earth. The sky was a relentless pale blue. The desert plants curled in on themselves, hoarding what little life they had left. The rhythm of the camp changed. The hunt for water became a daily obsession. Game grew scarce. The horses, the lifeblood of the people, grew thin and listless. Nietzsche held councils that lasted late into the night. Sarah, working nearby, could hear the tense arguments. To move the camp or to stay and pray for rain. "It is worse than the drought of 3 summers ago," Nana told her one evening. The old woman, since Nietzsche's decree, had become Sarah's teacher and protector. "Then we lost many horses. Now," she gestured at the empty sky. The first crisis came not from the sky, but from the mountains. A hunting party returned with grim news. Mountain lions, driven down from the high country by thirst, were getting bold. They had already killed 2 horses. That night, Sarah was ripped from sleep by a sound she would never forget. The scream of a horse in mortal terror. She scrambled out of her wickiup into a scene of moonlit chaos. A massive cougar was in the middle of the horse herd, a dark shape of muscle and fury. Warriors ran with torches and spears. Women grabbed their children, pulling them into the safety of the wickiups. In the confusion, Sarah saw a small child stumble and fall near the panicked horses. The mountain lion, wounded and enraged by the spears and flames, turned. It saw the easier prey. Sarah didn't think. She acted. She snatched a burning branch from a nearby fire and ran, planting herself directly between the wounded cat and the terrified child. The animal froze, its yellow eyes reflecting the fire. its lips peeled back in a silent snarl. Sarah screamed, a wordless roar of defiance, and shoved the torch forward. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, they were locked in a standoff. The desperate woman and the desperate beast. Then a spear found its mark, and the cat collapsed in a heap. Sarah dropped the torch, her legs suddenly weak. She scooped up the crying child and carried him to his hysterical mother. The woman clutched her son, her face wet with tears. She looked at Sarah, and for the first time, the hostility was gone. In its place was a raw, stunned gratitude. That was foolish, Nietzsche said, appearing at her side. But his voice held a note of something that sounded like respect. Yes, Sarah agreed, her body still trembling. He studied her for a long moment. But necessary. The drought got worse. The camp was forced to move twice, chasing rumors of water. Tensions ran high. The land was shrinking, and other bands were on the move too. But something had shifted for Sarah. The story of what she had done spread through the camp. The women who had ignored her now nodded as she passed. The children no longer mocked her. She was given a place at the communal fire. She was no longer just the Inda. She was the woman who had faced down the mountain lion. One afternoon, scouts returned with more bad news. White soldiers, more than they had ever seen before, moving through the territory. They look for water, one of the scouts reported. But they also look for us. They say we have been raiding their ranches. Have we? Sarah asked Nana quietly. The old woman gave her a sharp look. When children starve, men do what they must. Your people are no different. Sarah thought of Blackwood, of the greed and cruelty she had seen in Willow Creek. She couldn't argue. That night she found Nishi standing at the edge of the camp, staring out at the dark, thirsty land. Your people, he said without turning, they blame us for the dry wells, as if we command the rain. They're not my people, Sarah said softly. Not anymore. He turned to look at her then. No. Then who are your people? The question hung in the air between them. She thought of the child she had saved, of Nana's patient teaching, of this hard, silent man who had seen a strength in her she didn't know she possessed. I don't know, she admitted. He nodded slowly. The boy you saved. His name is Dakota. His mother. She wishes to know your name. Not Inda. Your real name. Sarah, she said. My name is Sarah. Sarah, he repeated, tasting the sound of it. It is a good name. Suddenly a cry went up from the guards. They had spotted something. Scouts were bringing in a wounded man, an Apache from another band. He had been shot. As the women tended to his festering wound, he gasped out his story. Soldiers had attacked his camp at dawn. A surprise attack. They had killed everyone. Men, women, children. No one was spared. They were hunting down the survivors. The drought had made everyone desperate, and desperation had turned to blood. The camp exploded into chaos. Some wanted to flee south, into Mexico. Others wanted to fight, to attack the soldiers before they could attack them. Nietzsche listened, his face grim. Late that night he found Sarah by the medicine fire. If we went to your people, he asked, his voice low, if we came in peace, what would they do? Sarah gave a bitter laugh. They would shoot you, and then they would say it was God's will. Not all of them. No, she admitted. Not all, but enough. He was silent for a long time. Tomorrow we move. Deeper into the mountains. There is a place there, a hidden canyon with a spring that never runs dry. We can defend it, and if the soldiers follow us, then we will fight. He looked at her, his eyes boring into hers. All of us. She knew what he was asking. I understand. Do you? You may have to face your own kind, with a weapon in your hand. Can you do that, Sarah? She thought of Blackwood's smirking face. She thought of the mob that had driven her out. Then she thought of Dakota's mother, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude. She thought of Nana's gentle hands. She thought of this man who saw not a harlot, but a survivor. They are not my kind, she said, her voice firm. I made my choice the day I walked into that desert. Everything since then has just been me learning what that choice meant. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, and something more. Then tomorrow, he said, you learn to use a bow. If you stand with us, you must be able to defend us. He reached out and briefly touched her shoulder. It was the first time he had touched her voluntarily since that day in the desert. It was a gesture of acceptance, more powerful than any words. Sarah sat by the dying fire, watching the stars wheel across the sky. The irony was as sharp as a knife. She might soon die, defending people who had once been her enemies, against people who had once been her own. But as she walked back to her wickiup, she felt something she hadn't felt since before Thomas died. A sense of belonging. She was no longer just the woman who walked out of the desert. She was Sarah, who had chosen her people not by the color of her skin, but by the fire of survival. The attack came at dawn, just as the sky was turning from gray to pink. The first sound was the crack of a rifle, followed by screams. Not the war cries of warriors, but the terrified shrieks of women and children. Sarah grabbed the bow Nietzsche had given her hand surprisingly steady. Gunsmoke was already filling the air, a foul-smelling fog that burned her eyes and throat. Blue uniformed soldiers were moving through the camp, firing disciplined volleys. Apache warriors, armed mostly with bows and old rifles, were falling. The natural defenses of their hidden canyon meant nothing against this kind of firepower. Sarah! It was Nana. The old woman was herding children toward the caves, hidden at the back of the canyon. Sarah ran to help, scooping a crying toddler into her arms. A soldier rounded the burning shell of a wickiup, his rifle raised. He was young, with a pale, freckled face. His eyes met Sarah's. He saw a white woman, dressed in deerskin, holding an Apache child. He hesitated. That single moment of confusion saved her life. An arrow sprouted from his shoulder, spinning him around. A young warrior, no older than 16, notched another arrow and yelled at Sarah to run. She ran, the child clinging to her heart pounding. The battle raged behind them. She could hear Nietzsche's voice shouting commands, rallying his men, trying to buy them time. In the relative safety of the cave, chaos reigned. Sarah took charge, her voice calm and clear. Children to the back, mothers with them. A wounded warrior staggered in, blood streaming from a gash on his head. Too many, he gasped. The chief says to flee. He will hold them. A volley of rifle fire echoed terrifyingly close. The soldiers had found them. Check for hostiles, an American voice bellowed from outside. Women and children are to be taken alive, for the reservation. Reservation? The word sent a chill down Sarah's spine, colder than any winter wind. She'd heard the stories. Cages where they tried to turn Apache into farmers, where they stole the children and forbade them from speaking their own language. A place where they would slowly kill your soul. Death was kinder. This way, a voice hissed from the shadows. It was Lausanne. Her face was grim, her usual animosity replaced by a fierce urgency. There is another way out. Hurry. Sarah didn't hesitate. Old rivalries were meaningless now. They were all just trying to survive. She helped organize the escape through a narrow hidden passage, carrying children, helping the elderly. They emerged onto the far side of the mountain. The sounds of battle had faded to a terrifying silence. Look, someone whispered, pointing back toward the canyon. A thick column of black smoke rose into the morning sky. Their home, their sanctuary, was gone. Keep moving, Lausanne ordered, her voice hard. They will track us. They walked all day, a ragged, heartbroken procession of survivors. As evening fell, the remaining warriors caught up to them. They were battered, bloodied, and grim. Sarah's heart leaped when she saw Nietzsche, but her relief was short-lived. He was favoring his left side, and his buckskin shirt was dark with blood. How many? Lausanne asked, her voice flat. Too many, Nietzsche said, his own voice hollow with grief. He recited the names of the dead. 23 warriors, 12 women who had stayed behind to fight. The young warrior who had saved Sarah's life was among them, Dakota's father. Sarah felt each name like a physical blow. They made a cold camp that night, without fires that might give away their position. Sarah found herself working side by side with Lausanne, tending to the wounded. You fought well, Lausanne said quietly, not looking up from the wound she was cleaning. At the caves, I saw you. We all did what we had to. Sarah replied. Yes, Lozen said, tying off a bandage. I was wrong about you, Inda. You are not weak. Before Sarah could respond, Nietzsche approached. His own wounds had been hastily bound. Let me see to those, she said, her voice gentle. He sat without protest, a sign of how badly he was hurt. As she carefully cleaned a bullet graze along his ribs, he spoke, his voice low. The soldier you faced, you could have called out to him, told him you were white. They would have rescued you. Sarah's hands never stopped their work. The thought didn't occur to me. She met his gaze. My place is here. My people are here. That soldier would have shot Dakota as easily as he would have shot a warrior. How could I stand with men who murder children? Your people say it is we who are the murderers. Then they lie, Sarah said flatly. I have seen who shares food when they are hungry and who hoards wealth while others starve. I know where I stand. He reached out and caught her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. The path ahead. It is dark. They will not stop hunting us. The reservation waits for those who are captured. Death waits for those who resist. I know, she said. A scout came running into the camp, his breathing ragged. Soldiers. They are making camp 5 miles back. They will be on our trail at first light. They had to move, again. As the survivors gathered their meager belongings, Sarah saw little Dakota clinging to his mother, his face streaked with tears. He was fatherless now. She knelt beside the boy she had once saved from a mountain lion. There were no words that could fix this, but she offered her presence, her shared sorrow. The boy's mother, a woman named Gwen, reached out and took Sarah's hand, her grip tight. They were bound together now by loss and survival. Nietzsche came to her, his face a mask of exhaustion and grief. You asked me once who you were, he said softly. Now you know. You are Apache, not by blood, by choice, by fire. Sarah stood and shouldered her pack. She looked at the faces around her, the remnants of a proud people, now refugees in their own land. Hopeless or not, this was her fight now, her family. As they filed out of the canyon, disappearing into the cold, starry night, Sarah looked back one last time. Somewhere back there the soldiers were sleeping, confident in their righteous mission to tame the savages. They would never understand. They would never know that the true savagery was the one that called itself civilization. The night swallowed them whole. Sarah walked beside Nietzsche into the darkness. She was no longer Sarah Mackenzie of Willow Creek. She was Sarah of the Apache. And the war for their survival had only just begun. The seasons bled into one another, each one marked by flight and fear. The small, broken band found shelter with a larger group of Chiricahua Apache, but it was only a temporary reprieve. The world was closing in. The bluecoats pressed from the north, the Mexicans from the south. The Apache were being squeezed, hunted like animals in their own ancestral lands. Sarah hardly recognized the woman she saw reflected in the surface of a still pool of water. Her skin was the color of tanned leather. Her hands were strong and calloused, as skilled with a healing poultice as they were with a skinning knife. She could read the land like a book, finding water where others saw only rock, tracking game with a silence that was born of necessity. She dreamed in Apache now. The language of her old life was becoming a distant memory. Sarah, Gwen called to her one morning. Nana asked for you. The old medicine woman had grown frail. The constant running had taken its toll. Sarah found her under a mesquite tree, her gnarled fingers sorting through a bundle of herbs. Sit, Nana commanded, her voice thin but still sharp. I will not see another winter. There are things you must still learn. Don't say that, Sarah said softly. I am old, Nana stated as if discussing the weather. But you are not. The people trust you. They will need a healer when I am gone. They spent the day together, Nana passing on the last of her sacred knowledge. Which roots could break a fever, which chants could soothe a troubled spirit, the stories behind the plants. Later Nietzsche came. The weight of leadership had etched new lines around his eyes and threaded his black hair with silver. The council meets, he said. You should both be there. The news was grim. The American general, a man named Crook, was now offering bounties for Apache scalps. Worse, he was recruiting Apache from the reservations to serve as scouts, turning brother against brother with promises of food and safety. We cannot fight our own kind, one elder argued, his voice heavy with sorrow. And we cannot surrender, another countered. To go to the reservation is to die a slow death. The debate was a familiar one, a circle of pain with no exit. Fight and be annihilated, or surrender and be erased. That night, Sarah sat with Nietzsche by their small fire. Their relationship had settled into a quiet, comfortable partnership, forged in the crucible of shared hardship. What would you have us do, Sarah? He asked suddenly. You who have seen both worlds. She watched the flames dance for a long moment. The world I came from, it was built on pretty lies. Lies about God and civilization, but underneath it was just greed. Your world is more honest, but honesty does not stop bullets. So we are doomed, he said, his voice flat. Maybe, she said, or maybe the ones who survive will be the ones who learn to walk in both worlds without losing who they are. He looked at her sharply. You have done this. I am trying, she whispered. A commotion at the edge of the camp interrupted them. Warriors were dragging in a prisoner, not a soldier, but a Mexican rancher. He'd been caught trying to steal their food. The cry went up immediately. Kill him! His people show us no mercy! Nietzsche raised a hand for silence. They learned the man's story. His family was starving. The drought and the fighting had ruined him. Nietzsche looked at Sarah. It was a test. What say you, Sarah? All eyes turned to her, the white woman who was now one of them. What good does it do to kill a starving man? She said slowly, speaking in Apache. But if we let him go, he may lead others here. She thought for a moment. Give him food, enough for his family, then blindfold him and lead him far away before you set him free. He cannot betray a place he cannot find. A murmur went through the council. It was a strange judgment. Not Apache, not white, but something in between. Nietzsche nodded slowly. It will be done as Sarah says. Later Lausanne came to her. The warrior woman who had once been her fiercest enemy was now a friend. That was wise, Lausanne said. You think like a chief. I think like someone who has been hungry, Sarah corrected her. As the leaves began to turn, a runner brought news that shocked them all. Geronimo, the great war chief, the heart of the resistance, was negotiating a surrender. If Geronimo could not win, what hope was there for them? The news hit Nietzsche hard. That night he stood guard alone, staring into the darkness. Sarah went to him. You are thinking of your family, she said. It was not a question. His voice was a low rasp of pain. My sister, her children. They were captured 2 summers ago. They are at the San Carlos reservation, if they are still alive. I was their chief. It was my duty to protect them. Blame is a heavy stone to carry, she said softly. It helps no one. You sound like Nana, he said with a sad smile. I learned from the best. They stood in silence for a long time. Then he spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. If I decided to surrender, to try and get terms that would keep what is left of our people together, would you come with us? To the reservation? The question was about more than surrender. It was about everything. About them. You are asking if I would choose a cage with the Apache over freedom with the whites? I am asking, he said, turning to face her, if you would choose to stay with us. She thought of the life she had lost and the life she had found. She thought of the soldiers she could have run to and the people she had run with instead. The reservation would kill you, Nietzsche, she said finally. It would kill your spirit. You are not meant for fences. That is not an answer. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I would go. My place is with the people who took me in when my own world threw me away. My place, she added, her voice dropping, is with you. He reached out in the darkness and took her hand, his calloused fingers interlaced with hers. Then we will find another way, he said. The next morning, scouts brought more bad news. General Miles had taken command. He was a ruthless man, determined to end the Apache problem once and for all. The noose was tightening, but as Nietzsche gathered the people, his eyes found Sarah's across the crowd. She saw a new determination there, a reflection of her own. They would face whatever came next together. The woman who had been branded a harlot in one world had become a healer and a warrior in another. She had lost everything, only to find what truly mattered. The sun rose over the mountains, and Sarah, stood ready to meet the day. The winter was a small mercy, a brief, quiet breath in the middle of a war. The band found a hidden valley, warmed by a natural spring, and for a few precious months they knew a fragile peace. Nana had passed in her sleep one night, and Sarah had taken her place as the band's healer, her knowledge of the old ways now deep and sure. She was teaching the children, Dakota among them, about the plants one morning when Lausanne appeared. "The chief asks for you," she said. "Scouts have returned." The news was a double-edged sword. General Miles's campaign was relentless, but he was offering new terms for surrender. Promises that families would not be separated, that they would be given good land. "Lies," one of the old warriors spat. "They have broken every promise they have ever made." "But for how much longer can we run?" another asked, his voice weary. "Our children are thin. We are becoming ghosts in our own land." Nietzsche listened to them all, then made a decision. "I will go and meet with them, not to surrender, to listen, to see if there is any truth in their words." He looked at Sarah. "Sarah will come, as our translator." It was a dangerous gamble, for her most of all. 3 days later, they approached the meeting place, an abandoned mining camp. Sarah wore a wide-brimmed hat, her face hidden in shadow. The army delegation was led by a Captain Morrison. A reservation Apache named Samuel served as his translator. When Sarah pushed back her hat, the captain's jaw dropped. "My God," he breathed. "Ma'am, are you a prisoner?" "I am exactly where I choose to be, Captain," Sarah said, her voice steady. The captain's face hardened. "I see. You've gone native." The negotiations were tense. Sarah translated the captain's slick promises, but she also translated the words he wasn't saying, the loopholes, the evasions. "Your woman seems to have forgotten her own kind," the captain said to Nietzsche with a sneer. "My kind are the people who showed me mercy when I was left to die," Sarah shot back. "My God is not found in the hearts of hypocrites who drive out widows and murder children." The captain's face flushed with anger, but Sarah's words had struck a chord with Samuel, the Apache translator. He began to add his own quiet warnings in their native tongue, telling them of the sickness and starvation on the reservations, of the promises that had already been broken. They rode back with no agreement, but with the truth. There was no good path. Spring brought the soldiers. More than ever before, they were being hunted relentlessly. One afternoon, scouting ahead with Lausanne, they saw the dust clouds, riders coming fast from 2 directions. It was an ambush. They raced back to warn the others, but it was too late. Blue-coated cavalry were already appearing on the ridge lines, closing the trap. "Into the rocks," Nietzsche commanded, but they all knew it was hopeless. They were outnumbered, outgunned. Sarah made a decision. "Let me talk to them," she said to Nietzsche. "They will take you from us." "Maybe," she said, "but maybe I can buy the children time. Maybe a white woman's voice will make them pause." She gripped his arm. "This is why I am here." Before he could stop her, she walked out from behind the rocks, her hands held high. The shooting stopped. A stunned silence fell over the canyon as the soldiers stared at the impossible sight of a white woman in Apache dress, walking calmly toward them. "I am Sarah Mackenzie," she called out, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. "I wish to speak to your commander." What happened next was something no one could have predicted. The commander, a Colonel Jameson, had a cousin in Willow Creek. He knew her story. He had heard the tale of the disgraced widow who had supposedly died in the desert. "Mrs. Mackenzie," he stammered, his face a mixture of shock and confusion. "But they said you—" "They lied, Colonel," Sarah said, her voice ringing with an authority she hadn't known she possessed. "They drove me out to die, and these savages you are so eager to kill were the only ones who showed me Christian mercy." She stood there between 2 worlds and negotiated. She told him her story. She shamed him with the hypocrisy of his civilization. She fought for her people not with a bow, but with the truth. In the end, he agreed to a compromise. The band would be escorted to the reservation, not as prisoners of war, but as a people accepting terms. The families would remain intact. The warriors would not be imprisoned. It wasn't freedom, but it was survival. That night, their last night of freedom, Nietzsche came to her. "You do not have to come with us, Sarah. They would let you go." She looked around the camp. She saw Gwen braiding her daughter's hair. She saw Dakota, who now looked at her with a son's eyes. She saw Lozan, her friend. This was her world. These were her people. "Where else would I go?" she said simply. He pulled her into his arms, the first real embrace they had ever shared. "The reservation will try to break us," he whispered. "I have been broken before," she whispered back. "It only makes you stronger in the mended places. And this time, I will have you." As the sun rose, they stood together, watching the light touch the mountains they would never call home again. "Do you regret it?" Nietzsche asked softly. "The choice you made in the desert?" Sarah thought of the timid, broken woman she had been. That woman had died out there, under the relentless sun. From her ashes, someone new had been born. Someone stronger. Someone free. "Never," she said. "They branded me with a lie, but you helped me find my truth. They cast me out, but I found a home. How can I regret the path that led me to myself?" The journey ahead would be long and hard. A different kind of war, fought not with arrows but with memory and spirit. But they would face it together. The woman who walked out of the desert alone would now walk into the future surrounded by her family, her hand held by the man she loved. And that was the greatest victory of all. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. I hope it touched your heart as much as it touched mine to tell it. Please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. I'd love to connect with fellow Western enthusiasts. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Sarah's incredible journey. What would you have done in her place? Let's discuss in the comments.